Eisenberg. I am the author of books such as Waiting for Your Cat to Bark, Always Be Testing, Call to Action, Be Like Amazon, and my latest is The Rice and Beans Millionaire, the tale of an improbable entrepreneur. And probably the greatest piece of advice I ever got was from my mentor, Roy Williams, who said the price of clarity is the risk of insult.
Ooh, the price of clarity is the risk of insult. What does that even mean, Bryan?
If you really want to have clear communications with people, you have to be willing to insult them at times. Like sometimes it's going to be tough. A little bit of tough love, I think, is always a good thing. Sometimes you've got to make the message hit home really hard if you want people to really understand where you're coming from.
Wow.
But you can only get away with that if people actually know that you really care. Let's be honest.
Ah, of course. Of course, right? So that's an interesting start point here for our conversation about your book because in reading it, first of all, I have to tell you, I'm really glad it's not what I thought it was at first, and that is another guide on how to save $1 million by eating rice and beans. So congratulations, it is not that. I'm
It
really
is
glad
not
because
that.
I was like, yeah. So because I've read your other stuff, and I'm like, please God, I like Bryan. I don't want it to be that. So it's not that. It's a wonderful fable. With that though, your characters, right? I don't think there was a lot of knowing at first, at least on some levels, right? So the directness and the clarity often was lost. Is that right? Did I get that right?
It was, right? It took time for Bob to hear Ricky's messages, right? And Ricky was careful when and how he delivered them because he knew he didn't have Bob in the right frame of mind, right? And I mean, look, it happens all the time. I mean, even with my son and being a baseball player, right? There are times where he's coachable and times that he's not. And when he's in one of those not coachable moments, I just shut up because I'm not going to win. It's not going to penetrate. He's not going to change. And that's okay, right? He's got to figure out when he's ready, when he's so frustrated that he's willing to change. And I think one of the hardest things that we as fellow citizens of the world have to deal with is we want to impart our worldview on others, but they may not be ready to hear it. And I think that's a big structure. And that comes back to my early roots as a social worker dealing with the chronically mentally ill, right? And I always used to say, like, when I first started my first sales jobs, after that, I was like, look, if I can persuade a chronically mentally ill, paranoid schizophrenic individual to take showers every day and take their medication, it's because I understand how to get into their reality and help them feel comfortable with that, right? And build that level of trust that they'll accept my authority, right? Because if not, they wouldn't do it. And they'll do what they need to do in order to be successful. And that really is what all communications is about, right? Is that transfer of trust and knowledge and wisdom, but it has to start with trust.
Yeah, definitely does. Definitely does. And talking about sales, you talk clearly in the book about how sales is a transfer of confidence. And that's absolutely true. I find that in the sales training I do. And confidence often comes through as energy, right? If
Hmm.
I'm energetic, if I'm enthusiastic in a real way, I always say, how Brian's excited is not how Phil's excited. It doesn't have to be that way. But in a real way, that changes things. So talk to me about that, Bryan, as the confidence game, if you will, of sales.
Yeah, it's funny because I just had a great conversation with one of the characters who's actually in the book, Brian Brushwood. Um, and if you don't know him, he has had a couple of very successful YouTube channels, Modern Rogue. He's a magician, and he actually just started another podcast, which is kind of interesting from a history perspective. You'll like this one. It's called The Con Man. It's a short podcast, it's only like 1 or 2 episodes right now. But he talks about the con that they had to play on Hitler, okay, during World War II. And it's fascinating when you take a look at that and you understand what they had to do. It's like, okay, they were expecting certain things. So how are you going to convince this man who's already kind of paranoid, right? To take the intel, to take the bait. How is this all set up? And I'm not going to get into details of it, but the at the very core of confidence, right, and of establishing that trust is being able to give of yourself first before you expect to take from others. And as Brian talks about, you're right, there's a gift that has to be exchanged, right? And you see that anytime you've ever watched a musician, a magician in the street, right? And he's got a crowd around him, how he starts getting that going, right? They initiate some kind of a contact. There's some kind of a gift, and this is he kind of explains. So I'm not going to steal his thunder about it, but that's really about establishing confidence, right? I've got to give of me first before you're willing to take from me.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's so interesting, right? That podcast sounds great. The Con Man. I'll have to check that out for sure. But give before you get, right? I mean, Bob Berg talks about that all the time, right? The go giver, not the go grabber, right? So that's super interesting. Super interesting. So with that, let's talk about some of that giving here. Because in reading the book, there's a lot of that there. And it starts out, one of the things that I guess is kind of counter to that is this whole crab mentality that you talk
Yep.
about. So break that down, explain that. Maybe folks have heard this, maybe they have not, but if you could talk about that a little more, that'd be great.
Well, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier, right? The need for me to feel like I'm back out on the road and being around some of my fellow speakers and some of the successful entrepreneurs that I've been around. And being around them, brings you an incredible amount of energy, right? That you get to gain from them because they you become who you hang around, right? And that crab mentality. If you're stuck around people who are struggling with you at your job and are frustrated with what they're in their life, guess what you're going to be, right? You're going to be frustrated and down. This is just common. And so if you can find great people, and I saw my good friend Gene showed popped up on here, brilliant guy, right? Every time I get to hang out with Gene, I get smarter, right? And that's the kind of crabs I want to be around because I know he's going to share with me something that he's learned. I'm going to get better, and basically he's lifting me out of that pot, right? That boiling pot of water, so I don't get boiled in with all the rest of the crabs.
Yeah, the good crabs, right? The good crabs, that the lifters instead of the grabbers, right? Those that pull
Exactly.
us down. So that's a choice. So many of those struggle being in the crab pot that they're in and never get out, or they fear that the people that I love are in this pot, right? And I don't know that I want to go. I don't know that that's comfortable. I don't know that that's good. So how do we gently encourage and influence those who are stuck in the pot that maybe want to change?
That was the main mission behind the book, right? It's sharing the stories, right? And I purposely didn't want to create a fictitious story, right? It needed to be based on real people and real people that you can encounter and meet and hear their stories. Like Peter Shankman, for example, right? Um, I got to tell his story in the book. He was down and out, you know, standing in the middle of Manhattan with a poster board, basically to get himself hired. And, he had all kinds of calls. It's like, look, you can be outrageous. You can do extraordinary things. And yes, you know what? That difficulty only means that something great is gonna happen next. Okay. I tell this to my son as well, right? When he's training, when he reaches a lull, right? Like in his velocity, he hasn't been able to gain any velocity. He, I tell him like you're gonna have a breakthrough. Like what you're doing is just not working. That's okay. We're gonna keep figuring it out. And that frustration leads to that next level. And I think um the key to getting successfully out of there is having people who are kind and want to help you pull you out of there, right? And it's why I think it's so important to find great mentors and great friends, who have the kind of things that you're looking for in your life.
Yeah, I agree. I think the better the people that we're able to surround ourselves with, the better. But with that, right, we have to be better too. Let's be clear, right? This can't be one way. So
Correct.
we have to improve, right? We have to. You talk in the book about 1% better, right? Altucher, James Altucher talked about that. You referenced James Clear in Atomic Habits, right? In your
Mhm.
book. So 1% better doesn't feel like anything a lot of days, right? That feels like, come on, Brian. I got 100 hairs on my head. One hair. How does that make a difference? So talk to me about that as it relates to how we can move the ball here as a Rice and Beans millionaire.
So it's funny. I wear two bracelets here. One of them is be better today than you were yesterday. And I started that basically actually when I started to coach my son and heavily involved. I had just left my agency, and I started the first conversion rate optimization agency in '98. And then right after that, Sammy was real young, really started getting early into baseball and stuff like that. And my youngest was about to be born, and I felt frustrated where I was in my life. I was 277 pounds. I had spent all my time in the agency. Yeah. And I said I learned more about optimization during the little over a year that I lost over 100 pounds. I got myself down to 172 pounds. I still now need to lose a few more again. Sorry. COVID definitely did have its hit, and aging doesn't help any. But the point is, you know what? Everybody used to ask me, how'd you lose all that weight? And I said, you do it 1 pound at a time. You literally, it's every choice of every meal that you take is a decision you have to make. You either have to be better than what you normally do or not better. And you know it, right? If you drive through that McDonald's and you pick up McDonald's, okay, instead of going to the salad place, that's your choice. And I think that's the key thing. And I know it doesn't feel like you're accomplishing that, and the scale will get stuck at times, and that's definitely happens a lot. But if you just keep progressing, you could just keep pushing. All of a sudden, I started off by walking every day. By walking, I was able to start cycling every day. By indoor cycling, I started going outdoor cycling. It just kept improving. Then I started lifting weights, and it's sort of the same thing, right? The path just becomes cleaner as you keep moving leaves out of the way. And that's, you just have to do that every day, whether it's in business, whether it's in life, whether it's in your relationships. um, these things ultimately matter. If you're just not happy with anything in your life, just start taking the first step.
Yeah, yeah. Well, getting started, right, is the biggest. That's often the biggest obstacle for us is getting started, and it's clear there's resistance in that. You talk cleanly in the book about this resistance that you were fighting against it, right? We're right here, and I don't want to move, and I've got this excuse. My wife won't get this, and I've got that excuse, right? I don't have the money, and I've got this excuse. I don't have the time. Well, start where you are, right? Don't worry about all of that. Talk to me a little bit about that, starting where you are with the Rice and Beans Millionaire. Give us a little bit of the story without giving it all away here, Brian, because I think it's helpful for people to kind of frame this in terms of the story.
Yeah, so we had Bob, and he was working two jobs, and he's frustrated because nothing, just like he's scraping by paycheck to paycheck, and it's just uncomfortable. And of course, something else happens. Look here. Here's a similar story. We had my daughter's car. She had my mom's car. My mom kept her car in the garage. It's a 2006 Volvo, and it's showing its age. The Volvos were not meant for Texas heat. Let's just put it that way. A lot of the plastic parts are hitting. And it cost a pretty penny to get it done, but it didn't feel like it's coming paycheck to paycheck because of everything we've built over the last number of years. So similar thing happens to Bob. He's basically living that paycheck to paycheck, and now he's under a ton of weight. He's got a boulder on top of him. His life is completely disrupted off of what should be. And my friend Dennis Yu said it great yesterday, right? Anything that you can solve with money is not a problem, right? My brother, early on when COVID first started, came down with colon cancer. Okay, he's well. It got healed
Good.
immediately. Anyone over 45, I'll tell you now, go get your colonoscopy. It matters, right? We shouldn't be talking about that kind of subject on here, but hey, the fact is that mattered a lot, right? Like the thought of losing him, the thought of him being sick, what could, like, that you can't solve with money. I'm sorry, just doesn't happen. It takes a lot more work than that. But if it's only money, then there's a million ways today to make extra money. Everybody, the people who have more money than they know what to do with don't have time, right? And they're willing to exchange their money that they value less than their time. So find a way to exchange your time for their money. It's not a hard formula.
Yeah, I love that. Simple stuff here. You quote Jeff Bezos. You say focus on what's not going to change in 10 years, which I think is a both a long term and a short term kind of
Yeah.
idea, right? So long term, well, okay, great. And the excuse would be, well, I don't know what's going to happen in 10 years. But the reality is, you kind of do, right? So you kind of do. So talk to me about that, Brian, and how you kind of how you live that and how that works for you.
Well, the last couple of weeks, everything we've been hearing is about Chat GPT, right? Like, there's all this AI is going to change the way the world's going to work. Sure, it might. It's not doing it today. And today, there's still room for great writers to tell great stories because the AI is very flat and generic, and you can create kind of some interesting things around it, but it's not ready to replace us as humans yet. Okay. Now, can it help save me time? Sure, it can definitely do that. But we assume that things are going to have an impact faster than they usually will. I mean, I can think back now. I first started on the web, and it's kind of crazy. My first interactions online were in 1983. I started my own bulletin board system back then, and
Oh wow, cool.
I'd hack the menus to try to get people to go to different places based on see if I could, kind of manipulate them or persuade them to go where I wanted them to go. And, obviously when the internet started taking off in 93, 94, 95, we started experimenting with some of this stuff. And it's like, okay, yeah, everybody was going to care about conversion rate optimization. It was obvious, like, okay, great, you can get new eyeballs, but hey, well, you know, can you sell them? And back then, nobody cared. And we just thought, hey, this is going to be a big CEO issue, but no one cared. Today, more people finally care. Okay. How many years later? It's 25 years later of the internet. And what happened is, and we'll come back to Bezos. Bezos said, "Hey, what's going to matter in the short term? In the short term, people want prices at products at cheaper prices, right? They want a greater selection, they want it delivered quickly, and they want to have great customer service. That's it. Real simple. Those four things are never going to change." Now, he couldn't deliver on everything that he saw in his vision right then and then when he started with books. But his vision and wasn't to take on, Borders and Barnes and Nobles. His vision was to take on the Walmarts of the world, right? He knew that long term, this digital technology was going to change human behavior, how we gather information, how we purchase, how we make decisions. And where he broke through is when he realized that when you shop on Amazon, he knew exactly who you were. And the second the iPhone first came out, and I got to get back in camera. The second the iPhone first came out, they were one of the first apps. Why? Now they tied your email to your phone number. Here's the biggest difference, right? And we talked about this in our last book, Be Like Amazon. When you walk into Walmart or I walk into Walmart, they don't know if we're the most valuable customer or we're there for the first time ever. But every single site that you touch has affiliate links with Amazon. Every single time you touch Amazon, every single time you go into a Whole Foods and buy now, they know exactly what you're buying, who you are, how to deliver it to you, and they're always working to satisfy those four things. And he knew that that's where the technology was going to eventually get to. And I think long term, he needed to understand that. Short term, satisfy the customer's demands: price, availability, selection, experience. And by the way, I talk about in the book, that's how their category managers manage their product teams, essentially. They just have to win out in those four categories, and they know they'll get the purchases because that's what customers care about.
Yeah, absolutely. Simple stuff, but hard to execute a lot of times. Otherwise, right? I mean, if it wasn't, there'd be a million Amazons. There's one, right? There's
There's one.
just one.
And that's the beauty of the Rice and Beans Millionaire, right? Like, this is a true story. The original Rice and Beans Millionaire, and my brother and I would joke about this all the time, like for years when we had our agency, when we've been building other businesses, when we've been consulting other companies, we'd say, why can't we just come up with this a Rice and Beans business? And I told kind of the story of this guy, but this guy started what he was doing in the 1980s. My dad met him as a vice president of the bank, and he would literally walk in with a duffel bag filled with cash. Okay, and he was a very young kid at the time. And the bank wanted to know, okay, well, we can do business with you, but we need to know more about your business because that's a lot of cash, right? It was still pre 9/11, but they were still a little concerned. They had right to be concerned, by the way. That's a different story. Not because of the business, but because he wasn't paying taxes. But my father followed him around for a week and saw what he was doing for a business. And when you think about how brilliant his model was, it was the Chipotle Uber Eats of the 1980s, right? And I think when you start realizing it's like it could be that simple and he could make that much money, that's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. He created essentially what would be the first ghost kitchens. If you think about it, like it's mind numbing. And that's why I just want people to say, technology will change. No question. But how can technology enable what you envision, right? Don't let it hinder you. And that's the cool thing about today is, in the 1980s, to pull what he pulled was just sheer genius. Today, there are people pulling that off on phones. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think about my hometown and 984 people back in Wisconsin. And there's one guy who is the Uber of Crivets. One guy.
Mhm.
He's got the Crivets taxi, right? He just drives around, he picks people up because there isn't Uber, because there isn't public transportation. So his deal is he drives people around and he helps people not get DUIs because people aren't going to stop drinking. Let's be really clear, right?
Yep.
People need to go to the doctor. That's not going to change either, and there's not enough doctors close by, so that's not going to change. And grocery shop. If he just hits those three, and maybe occasionally probably church or a funeral, he's all set. And
That's
that's
it.
simple stuff.
That's exactly it. And I think, especially, we look at the tech world, right? And we look at some of the things that some of these companies are doing. And it's like, okay, it's just another Me Too product. And it's not that they can't make money, but there's so many problems. There's so many opportunities that we chase the shiny object instead of saying, okay, how do we solve the simple stuff? Like, why can't somebody find an easy solution to pick up leaves in the fall? Seriously, it's a lot of work. I mean, it's getting my son paid. It's great, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah, doesn't he have a leaf vacuum? Have you seen those?
Yeah, but you can go on the very high end, but there should be something that's much simpler. Because even the little portable vacuums, I was walking the dog the other day, and I'm watching a guy with the vacuum, and he's literally picking up like one leaf at a time. I'm like, dude, your leaves are up to here. Like, you're gonna be there all week just picking up leaves.
That's so funny. That's awesome. Well, cool. Well, so many lessons in the Rice and Beans Millionaire, Brian. I got to tell you, I enjoyed it. It's a simple read. Took about 2 hours to do. I want to, as we wrap here, one of the quotes in there that really kind of smacked me in the face was this one. It said, "You see a lot more opportunities when you look past yourself." That was a big one. Like, duh. So, talk to me about that one, please, and take us home with some insight around that.
I got to tell you, this was a very strange book to write. Okay, I sat down with my brother when the idea first came to me, and it came to me playing catch with Sammy. It was the middle of a work day. I was trying to send something off to a client, and he asked me, "Hey, Dad, can we go out and have a catch?" I said, "Let me just send this email off, and then we can go out." I'm like, "Okay." So we run outside, and the first ball hits my glove, and I'm like, this joy of that freedom of being able to do that just hit me. Again, I don't know if it was all the craziness the last couple, whatever it was, but it just hit me. And I sat down with Jeffrey and we planned out like all the first principles of entrepreneurism that people needed to know. And I started to mind map it and figure out like where it would go, kind of like in a weird arc of the book, like what chapters, so to speak, like high level, right? Like 3 acts of a book, right? I knew we'd have a grand reveal at the end, and I knew that much. But then last week, my friend Catherine Aragon puts a post up about having, an all you can win mentality. And it triggered something in me. I'm like, I didn't even realize I wrote some of these things. It literally came out of my subconscious. Okay. And this is one of those. And I mentioned to her, I said, in the book, we start off with Bob having this I got to win no matter what mentality, right? And he gets rejected real hard on that one. Okay. By the way, that was the one line I also needed to correct the guy who's recording the audiobook on. He just didn't quite bring the thunder when the line, so I'm not going to spoil it for
I
others.
do.
Okay. But he got it finally. And then I said, I realized that later on in the book, I got to this point where he had transformed, and he got this message that, yes, there's a lot more when you stop looking inside your own world and in your own messes and in your own positive stuff, and you start looking at your teammates and your colleagues and the people around you, your community, your tribe, that you start to see so many more opportunities to score. And I honestly, I don't know where it got, coming from in the brain. It was not a deliberate thing. I literally would wake up every morning and I'd try to knock out a chapter. And the story just came out that way. So, but yeah, that is one of probably one of the lines that I've realized has a lot of impact on me as well. And it comes back to what we were just talking about, right? I miss my teammates on the speaking circuit, right? I miss being able to hang out with them, the random encounters of, seeing, Vin and Mel Robbins, he's all the way from Australia. We're in the middle of Las Vegas, and all of a sudden we decided we're going to meet up for breakfast. Like, that stuff is amazing, and those conversations are priceless, right? And it's because none of us were worried about what we were going to be doing that day. We were looking to see how we can connect with others. And I think when you start having that worldview, not only will you have a greater impact on yourself, but obviously you'll have greater impact on your tribe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great stuff, Bryan. Love all that. The book is The Rice and Beans Millionaire. It's a Bryan Eisenberg that spent some time with us, his brother Jeffrey, co-author of the book. Bryan, if people want to connect with you, where do you want them to go so that they can get more connected? Of course, they can get the book on Amazon or anywhere. I mean, the Kindle book is like $2 right now, so
Yep.
go get a copy of that. But where would you like them to go?
They can find me anywhere: LinkedIn, Twitter. I've even started to play around with TikTok a little bit. We'll see. Instagram. Yeah, we're keeping the books very inexpensive until the new year. Then the regular prices will kick in. We're kind of just doing a pre-release. There was kind of a little bit of a glitch that happened to us, so we kind of had to postpone the launch, and so the latest that we could do it was December 14th. Amazon wouldn't let me push it to the next year. So we said, okay, I'm going to turn this bad lemon into a lemonade. And so we just said, hey, friends and family, go out, get your copies. Please leave us reviews. I see our good friend Tim McClure's there. He left, some great feedback on the book. Other people have left great Amazon review, like yourself. If you can do that next year, hopefully we'll get more people, sharing this, not only with themselves, but even more importantly, with their kids. And that's really what we're hoping for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a great lesson. It's a great book. It's super easy to read, friends. If you're listening, go get yourself a copy of The Rice and Beans Millionaire. Get to know Bryan Eisenberg more. Lots of great stuff in there that we didn't even cover. So many lessons in a book that you can read in 2 hours. Congratulations, Bryan. And I
Thank
can't
you.
wait to see you again, man. Thank you so much.
Likewise.